In the spring of 1945, on the island of Okinawa, a fisherman's widow near Idaman kept her 4 children alive through 83 days of siege on whatever the ground still offered. She dug until her hands bled, and what she found is number 7 on this list. A few miles north, in the caves above Yomitan, a 14-year-old boy learned to make something out of a bitter vine that grew wild along the field edges. That's number 4, and the reason his younger sisters made it through that summer. If this list makes you sit up a little straighter, hit subscribe. There's more of this waiting. Let's start the countdown. Let's start with the one that came from outside the island entirely. 10. Rainwater-soaked hardtack. Military hardtack, biscuit, rainwater. Anyone who traded for or found a stray biscuit in a bombed-out depot would drop it into a tin of collected rainwater and let it sit until it softened enough to chew. It tasted of wet flour and rust, but it sat in the stomach for hours, which was worth more than flavor. A single biscuit could trade for a fistful of dried fish or a day's foraging, real currency in a place where money had stopped meaning anything. Softening a biscuit in rainwater was, for a lot of families, the closest thing to a meal with no work left in it. 9. Boiled banana plant stem, water, salt if there was any. The outer fibrous layers were peeled away and the soft inner pith sliced thin, then boiled until it gave in. It came out bland and watery, a little bitter, but it filled the stomach in a way that mattered more than taste that year. Banana plants grew around almost every home on the island. A single stem might feed a family of 5 for one meal, where a sack of rice once fed the same family for a week. And once the fruit and even the leaves were gone, the stem was what was left standing. Eating the part of the plant nobody used to eat was its own quiet arithmetic. Nothing wasted, because nothing could be. 8. Roasted cycad seeds. Cycad seeds, known locally as sotetsu, water. These seeds are toxic raw, and Okinawan families going back generations knew it. The seeds were sliced, soaked, and rinsed repeatedly over several days to draw the poison out before they were ever roasted. Even done carefully, it wasn't always enough. The soaking process alone could stretch past a week before a family judged the seeds safe to eat. And even then, Okinawans have a name for the hunger that drove people to try anyway. Sotetsu jigoku, cycad hell, because some who ate it got sick, and some didn't survive it. Families turned to it in 1945 the same way earlier generations had during hard years before the war, when there was nothing else standing between the household and starvation. That a food this dangerous was still someone's last resort tells you almost everything about what that summer was. Here's the part nobody talks about. A cave sheltering 100 people during the day could go quiet by evening, and not because it had gotten safer. Someone doesn't come back from a water run or a foraging trip along the tree line, and the meal that gets divided that night is smaller by exactly 1 portion, and nobody says why out loud. That's what a siege does to food. It isn't just short. It's short in a way that keeps count for you, whether you want it to or not. Number 7 is what one mother found when there was almost nothing left to look for. 7. Wild yam root. Wild yam root, water. It had to be dug out of hillside dirt with sticks or bare hands, washed clean of grit, then boiled until soft enough to mash with a spoon. It came out starchy and a little slick, filling in a way that plain water never was. This is what the widow near Idaman dug for until her hands bled. A full day's digging might turn up 3 or 4 roots, barely enough for one meal, for the 4 children who were counting on her to come back with something. A meal you had to bleed a little to find carries a different weight than one you didn't. 6. Dried fish scraps, shared among families. Dried fish scraps, heads, bones, tails, whatever didn't normally make it to a plate, and water. The scraps were soaked to soften, then simmered down into a thin, salty broth that got ladled out and divided among whichever families were sheltering together that week. It tasted like the sea, warm and salt-heavy, cutting through the emptiness of everything else on offer. Fishing families along the coast had learned to save every part of the catch long before the war, and in 1945 that habit was the difference between one household eating and several. A pot split 5 ways instead of 1 was still a kind of wealth, even with almost nothing in it. 5. Salt, water, boiled rice. Scraps, broken rice grains, and dust. Seawater. Families combed bombed-out storehouses for spilled grain, gathering it grain by grain into a cloth, then boiled what they found in seawater because fresh water was as scarce as the rice itself. It came out gritty and briny, barely rice at all, but it was rice. A day's foraging might turn up less than a cup for an entire family, scraped from a warehouse floor that had held tons of it a year earlier. Eating grain off a bombed floor meant admitting how far things had fallen, and eating it anyway meant refusing to stop there. There's a specific kind of exhaustion in cooking for people during a siege that doesn't seem to have an end date. You boil water you're not sure is safe, over a fire you're not sure is wise to light. For a meal you know won't be enough. And you do it again the next day, and the day after that. It would be easier, some days, to simply stop, to let hunger make the decision instead of you. The people on this list didn't stop. That refusal, quiet and completely unrecorded by anyone, is most of what got families through that summer. Number 4 is a meal made out of what was already considered leftover. 4. Boiled Goya, bitter melon, skins. Goya rinds and skins, not the fruit itself, which was usually long gone, plus water. The bitter outer skin was sliced thin and boiled down until it softened, cutting some of its sharpness but never all of it. It tasted sharply bitter first, then almost sweet underneath, the way hunger can make almost anything taste layered. This is the vine the boy from the caves above Yomitan learned to use. One vine might have already fed 2 or 3 families before he ever got to its skins, but what everybody else had thrown away was still worth boiling. Eating what another family had already discarded and calling it dinner was its own kind of math nobody wanted to do out loud. 3. Cave-foraged fern shoots. Young fern shoots, known as warabi, and water. They were picked from shaded ground near cave mouths and hillside paths at first light, rinsed of dirt, and boiled briefly to cut the bitterness. They came out green tasting and a little chewy, a small textured relief after weeks of thin soups. Slipping out of a cave at dawn to forage meant doing it while shelling could resume at any moment, and a good morning's foraging, maybe 20 minutes outside before it felt too dangerous to stay, might fill one cupped hand, so every fern shoot had already cost something before it was ever cooked. A meal gathered at that kind of risk stopped being just food and started being proof someone had made it back. 2. Sugarcane pulp chew raw, sugarcane stalks, nothing else. The stalks were peeled back and chewed section by section, the juice swallowed and the fibrous pulp spit out or worked down when there was truly nothing left. It came out sweet on the first bite, then dry and fibrous, a small jolt of sugar in a stomach that had mostly forgotten what sweetness felt like. Okinawa's cane fields had covered close to a fifth of the island's farmland before the war, and by 1945 they were one of the only things still standing in open ground. So children learned to break off a single stalk, sometimes the only food they'd get between one shelter and the next, from abandoned fields on the way to wherever they were sheltering next. A single stalk of sugarcane, chewed slowly, could stretch an afternoon further than it had any right to. Somewhere on this island in the summer of 1945, a mother decided, again, for the 100th time that season, that her children would eat something today, even if it was only leaves. Nobody handed her a reason to keep doing that. There was no ration card, no guarantee, no promise that tomorrow's foraging would go any better than today's. She did it anyway, the way thousands of others did it anyway, without anyone writing it down. Number 1 is what that decision looked like, boiled down to almost nothing. 1. Sweet potato vine soup. Sweet potato vines and leaves, not the root, which was usually already dug up and gone, plus water and salt if a household still had any. The vines were chopped and boiled down into a thin, dark green soup, simmered until the leaves gave up their toughness. It tasted mildly bitter and a little slick, warm going down, closer to broth than to a meal in any other year. Sweet potato had been Okinawa's staple crop for generations, providing an estimated 2/3 of the island's daily calories before the war. And once the roots were dug and eaten, families turned to the vines that farmers had always left in the field or fed to livestock, the part of the plant nobody had ever needed before, turning what used to be scraps for animals into the last meal standing between a family and nothing is, in the end, the whole story this list has been telling. Pick one of these, just one, make it this week. Sit at an actual table, not the couch, and set a place like someone's joining you, because in a way they are. Eat it slow enough to taste what it is you're really tasting. Tell me in the comments, was it the sweet potato vine soup or the sugarcane pulp that stayed with you longest? These meals were never about nutrition, and they were never about being resourceful. They were about people refusing to stop being people. That's what they still mean. That's the only word that matters here, dignity.